This episode, China's Rise from the Sovereign Drift series, is brought to you by Vizkard Studio.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a fascinating stack of sources you've provided, articles, research notes, all focused on understanding contemporary China.
It's quite the collection.
It really is. Our mission here is to basically give you a shortcut, distill the key insights about this, incredibly complex and globally significant power. We'll pull out the surprising facts, maybe even find a little humor along the way.
Sounds good. Synthesizing this breadth is definitely the challenge. But the goal is to make it digestible, right? To give you a clearer picture of China's journey and where it stands now.
Exactly. Okay, let's dive in. The material lays out this incredible journey, doesn't it? From the early days of the People's Republic right up to, basically yesterday. Decades of huge shifts.
Monumental shifts. You look at the 1950s, it wasn't just setting up shop. You had the Sino-Soviet treaty jumping into the Korean War.
Right, big geopolitical moves straight away.
Yeah, and domestically rolling out Soviet-style land reforms, focusing on heavy industry. Then you get the first National People's Congress in '54, the first Constitution, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence with India. It really set the stage.
Define the trajectory from the get-go. Yeah. Okay, fast forward a bit. The 1970s come up again and again in these notes as truly transformative. What were the key turning points there?
Absolutely pivotal.
Yeah.
1972 is huge. Nixon goes to Beijing. That's a game changer.
The opening to the West.
Precisely. And establishing ties with Japan the same year. Then, 1976, just a massive year. You have the deaths of both Zhu Enlai and Mao Zedong.
Wow, both in the same year.
Yeah. And then the rest of the Gang of Four follows almost immediately. That whole sequence just clears the deck, politically speaking, and sets up Deng Xiaoping's rise in the late 70s.
In Deng's era, that really feels like a new chapter in the material. What stands out from his reforms? Anything surprising?
Well, the sheer scale, first off. The one-child policy, obviously massive social engineering. Then the economic reforms, the 4 modernizations. Agriculture, industry, defense, science.
The focus was clearly economic and practical.
It was, but what's fascinating, and the sources highlight this, is that immediately the democracy wall movement pops up, calling for a 5th modernization political reform.
So that tension between economic opening and political control was there from the start.
Exactly. And diplomatically, establishing relations with the U.S. in '79, Deng visiting Washington. It cemented that opening to the West.
Okay, moving closer to the present, the turn of the millennium, the notes mention a couple of friction points.
Yeah, things like the NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in '99, and that incident with the U.S. spy plane collision in 2001. Moments that showed China becoming, let's say, more assertive or willing to push back when it felt its interests were challenged.
Which brings us to that incredible economic acceleration. I mean, the numbers in the sources are just stunning. Overtaking Japan by 2010 to become number 2.
An incredible milestone.
And then by 2014, based on that purchasing power parity measure, the economy actually surpassing the U.S., that pace is just mind-boggling. How did that translate into, say, military power or spending?
That's where the numbers really tell a story. Think about this. U.S. military spending was 10 times China's in 2000. Just 10 times.
Okay.
By 2011, it was 5 times larger. And by 2014, only 3 times larger.
Wow, that gap closed incredibly fast in just 14 years.
It's a dramatic shift in the strategic balance, happening almost faster than people realized at the time.
So how did they manage that? What does it tell us about how power actually works inside China? To get at that, we need to look inside at the political structures. The sources talk about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and how it operates, and it sounds like it's not always simple.
No, it's definitely not monolithic. The core concept, as the research describes it, is these parallel party and state systems. There's this great analogy used. The CCP is like the property owner, and the state is the property manager.
Okay, so the party owns the place, makes the big decisions, and the government manages the day-to-day.
That's the basic idea. The party sets the direction, the policies, and the state apparatus, the government ministries and so on, implements them.
But you can see how that might cause problems, right? Like, who's really in charge on the ground? Does it lead to friction?
It absolutely can, and does. The notes point to this as a persistent challenge, especially locally. You often have the local party secretary and the local governor coming from different factions, which can lead to, the sources call it infighting.
Right.
And that hurts efficiency. The classic example mentioned is the 2008 Sichuan earthquake. Premier Wen Jiabao apparently couldn't directly order the military to mobilize. He needed approval from Hu Jintao, who held the top party and military posts.
So a real coordination bottleneck in a crisis.
Exactly. Which helps explain why under Xi Jinping, they've really consolidated power into that three-in-one system, him holding the top party, state, and military jobs. General Secretary, President, and Central Military Commission Chairman.
Trying to streamline things.
Right. Though there's still this sort of informal division, you know. The president's office deals more with foreign affairs and defense, while the premier's office handles the economy, social issues.
Okay, that structure makes sense. But who are the people in these top roles? How do they get there? The sources had some surprising details about their backgrounds.
Yeah, it's really quite revealing. Looking at that fifth generation of leaders, the ones currently or recently in top spots, almost a third of the 18th Politburo, that's the key decision-making body, didn't have any formal university education.
Really? That higher percentage?
Highest since 1992, apparently. Many came up as professional revolutionaries or factory workers. You know, Xi himself joined the party back in 74. Li Zhanshu, Zhao Leji, Wang Yang all joined in 75.
So not necessarily the academic elite, you might assume.
Not always. Although the notes do highlight the importance of the Communist Youth League pathway. Cadres like Li Keqiang or Hu Chunghua coming up through the Youth League tend to get promoted faster and higher.
Interesting. What else? Any other patterns in who reaches the top?
Well, there's limited foreign experience generally. And there's been a noticeable shift away from the technocrats, the engineers who dominated earlier generations, towards people with backgrounds in humanities or social sciences in the current Politburo.
A different skill set maybe being prioritized.
Could be. Also, provincial leadership experience is huge. Like 20 out of 25 Politburo members had served as leaders in the provinces. Guangdong and Shanghai seem particularly important stepping stones.
And diversity.
Still very limited. The notes point out a real lack of ethnic minority representation at the top, and only 2 women in the Politburo, with no woman ever on the standing committee, the absolute apex of power.
Okay, so that's the leadership. But the sources also really emphasize this ongoing challenge for the CCP, maintaining social stability. And tied to that, its own legitimacy. It sounds like unrest has been a growing issue. A
significant one. The numbers cited are stark. Mass incidents, that's the term used for protests, riots, group petitions, apparently jumped from about 8,700 in 1993 to an estimated 180,000 in 2010.
That's an enormous increase. How has the party responded?
Well, historically, with things like the strike hard campaigns against crime, often triggered by specific shocking events, like those mentioned rapes in 81 or a plane hijacking in 83. But over time, it's evolved into this massive, routinized system called YWIN, which means maintain stability.
So it's become institutionalized.
Very much so. It's a huge police and security effort focused on broad social order with enormous budgets and personnel. It shows how seriously the leadership takes this potential for instability.
You can really sense that concern for legitimacy in the quotes provided.
Absolutely. Xi Jinping asking rhetorically about the Soviet collapse, the People's Daily saying China never stopped reflecting on how the Soviet communists lost power. It's clearly top of mind.
And Xi's anti-corruption campaign fits into this picture too, right?
Definitely. Taking down huge figures like Zhu Kaihu and Guo Boxiang, both former top military leaders, that sends a powerful message. It's been very authoritarian in style, of course.
But does it work? Does it reduce that unrest?
The sources suggest there might have been a recent decrease in mass incidents, though it's unconfirmed. Interestingly, they speculate it might actually be linked to a slowdown in local investment, which often fuels land disputes and protests, rather than just the anti-corruption drive itself.
That's counterintuitive.
It is. One potentially positive sign noted, though, is the reform of the Central Political and Legal Commission, the CTLC. It was downgraded after the 18th Party Congress, and its new head has apparently emphasized judicial independence more. Given past abuses of power by that body, that could be significant.
Okay, shifting gears to the economy, we touched on the incredible growth, but the material makes it clear this economic engine, while powerful, is facing some serious headwinds.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, second largest economy, but you have to remember, as the notes point out, its GDP per capita in 2014 was still down around the level of Azerbaijan. So huge internal development challenges remain.
Right, lifting hundreds of millions more people up.
And the growth model itself is under strain. Premier Wen Jiabao famously called it unsustainable, uncoordinated, unbalanced, and unstable way back in 2007.
And has it gotten better since then?
According to the sources, it actually got more unbalanced, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis. Investment reached this unprecedented level, nearly 48% of GDP since 2009.
Almost half the economy just plowed back into investment. What are the downsides of that?
Well, you get huge excess capacity in industries like steel and cement. Returns on that investment start to decline, and you build up mountains of debt, especially at the local government level.
A potential debt bomb.
It's a major concern. Plus, China's hitting, or has hit, what economists call the Lewis turning point. Basically, the endless supply of cheap labor from the countryside is drying up. Wages are rising.
So the old model of just being the world factory based on cheap labor, that's running out of steam.
Exactly. It forces a shift towards higher value manufacturing, innovation, domestic consumption, a much harder transition.
So given these challenges, what are Xi and Li Keqiang, the premier, actually doing? What reforms are they trying?
They've definitely tried a few things. The sources mentioned Finance Minister Liu Jiwei's big push on fiscal reform, trying to get a handle on that local debt, converting it into bonds, creating this huge new market.
Trying to make the debt more transparent and manageable.
Right. And there's been movement on liberalizing interest rates, letting market forces play a bigger role in setting capital costs. Premier Li Keqiang also made a big push to cut red tape, ease government approvals for businesses.
Did that have an effect?
Apparently, yes. The notes say it led to a massive spike in private business registrations in 2014 because it just became easier to start something up.
Okay, so those sound like steps towards a more market-driven system. But is it all moving in that direction? The materials seem to suggest some tension there.
A huge tension. That's the core contradiction highlighted. On one hand, you have these reforms aiming for more market competition. On the other hand, you have Xi Jinping's emphasis on party leadership, ideological tightening, things like those internal documents, number 9 and number 30, warning against Western ideas and this sort of Maoist-influenced revivalism.
So market reforms bumping up against strengthening party control.
Exactly. And that creates real uncertainty about how deep these market reforms can actually go if they conflict with the party's dominance.
Which brings us to the bigger picture, China and the world economy. This idea of interdependence comes up a lot.
Yes, the whole Kantian peace idea that deep economic ties make conflict less likely.
Because it would hurt both sides too much.
Precisely. And the U.S.-China relationship is often described as this complex interdependence. China needs the U.S. market for exports. The U.S. needs China to buy its debt. China holds almost 10% of U.S. debt, according to these notes. And consumers benefit from cheap Chinese goods. It's a tangled web.
So China's deeply embedded in the global system.
Very much so. It's been a strong joiner of institutions like the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank. But, and this is key, it's not just passively participating. It's using its growing influence to reshape these institutions.
Or so.
Pushing for IMF reforms to get more voting power, for example, and also creating its own parallel institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and the New Development Bank with the other BRICS countries.
Challenging the existing financial architecture.
Gently, perhaps, but yes.
Yeah.
And gradually strengthening the yuan, setting up currency swap deals, renminbi clearing hubs, all aimed at chipping away at the dominance of the dollar and euro.
And the supply chains. How has China's role changed there?
Fundamentally, it's become the central hub for manufacturing and assembly in so many global value chains. The iPhone example is classic components come from all over. But the final assembly, the value addition that gets tracked in trade stats, happens largely in China, is moving the product, not necessarily the whole factory anymore.
And replacing the U.S. as the top market for neighbors like Japan and South Korea.
A huge shift in regional economic gravity.
Okay, let's pivot now to foreign policy and grand strategy. The sources paint Xi Jinping as having a much stronger personal mandate than his predecessors, Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. He seems to be articulating a much bolder vision for China's place in the world.
Definitely. You have these big slogans, the China Dream, the Asia-Pacific Dream, and of course, One Belt, One Road, the Silk Road Economic Belt, and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road.
Catchy names. What's the underlying message?
It's all about national rejuvenation, restoring China's perceived rightful place as a major, even dominant global power. It's a clear departure from Deng Xiaoping's old advice to hide your strength and bide your time. Ta Guang Yangwei. Xi is definitely not hiding China's strength anymore.
But, okay, here's another complexity from the material. This idea of fractured authority in making foreign policy. Big vision from the top, but maybe messy execution. What does that mean in practice?
It means that even with Xi's strong vision, the different parts of the bureaucracy don't always coordinate smoothly. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance, often struggles for influence because its top leaders usually aren't on the Politburo.
So they lack the political clout.
Right. The example given in the notes is pretty stark. In 2012, the Ministry of Public Security, basically the police started issuing passports with a map showing disputed islands as Chinese territory.
Sure.
Apparently, they didn't even consult the foreign ministry first.
Wow, that must have caused some diplomatic headaches.
Huge ones. And you see similar issues with the military, the PLA. They might conduct missile tests or major exercises sometimes without fully coordinating with the civilian side of foreign policy.
So different power centers acting somewhat independently.
To a degree. And then you have what the sources call actors on the margins who also stir the pot.
Who are they?
Think big state-owned resource company executives like that CNOOC chairman calling drilling rigs mobile national territory. Or local officials pushing nationalist agendas. Even netizens online demanding tougher stances on sovereignty issues. They all have their own incentives.
Makes coordination even harder.
For sure. Though there have been efforts to improve it, consolidating those various maritime law enforcement agencies into a unified China Coast Guard in 2013 was one step.
And the National Security Commission.
Yes, establishing the NSC, also in 2013, was explicitly aimed at getting the defense, foreign policy, and internal security people talking to each other better, trying to create more coherence.
But this fragmentation, this sometimes uncoordinated action, it must lead to tensions, especially with neighbors. The East and South China Seas seem like prime examples.
Absolutely flashpoints. Take the Korean Peninsula. China's overriding priority, according to the material, is regime survival in North Korea. That led them to take what's described as a neutral or even pro-Pyongyang stance during really serious incidents in 2010, like the sinking of the South Korean warship Cheonan or the shelling of Yeonpyeon Island.
Which obviously didn't sit well with the U.S., Japan, or South Korea.
Exactly. It breeds distrust. Then, in the East China Sea, over the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands, remember that trawler incident in 2010? China reacted really strongly, demanding the captain's release, cutting off high-level talks with Japan, even reportedly halting exports of rare earth minerals.
Playing hardball.
Very much so. And by 2015, the assessment was that China had effectively established a new status quo by routinely sending its Coast Guard ships into the waters around those islands.
And the South China Sea, that seems even more complex with multiple claimants.
It is. China's assertion of the Nine-Dash Line back in 2009, claiming vast swaths of the sea, and then the massive land reclamation building artificial islands on disputed reefs and rocks that really alarmed everyone.
How did other countries react?
The U.S. ramped up alliances, like that defense agreement with the Philippines, and started conducting more freedom of navigation operations, sailing warships near the reclaimed features to challenge China's claims. Vietnam and other ASEAN countries also protested strongly, especially when China parked that giant oil rig, the Haiyang Shiyu, in disputed waters in 2014.
So putting all this together, the economic integration, the assertive foreign policy vision, the internal coordination issues, the regional tensions, what does it mean for China's role in the world? Is it trying to tear down the existing global order or just find a more advantageous place within it?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? The consensus in the material seems to lean away from the idea that China wants to completely overturn the existing liberal international order. It generally prefers to join institutions, as we discussed.
But not just join, right?
No, definitely not. It joins to shape them, to reshape them, as the sources say, to better serve their own interests. You see this across the board: arms control, human rights discussions, law of the sea. China participates, but often contests the norms or pushes its own interpretations.
Like the freedom of navigation issue?
Exactly. China interprets freedom of navigation differently than the U.S., particularly regarding military intelligence gathering within its exclusive economic zone. So it's not rejecting the framework outright, but it's definitely challenging specific aspects of it. Ultimately, its positions seem very interest-driven, whether that means siding with developing nations on trade subsidies or using its economic muscle through initiatives like Belt and Road.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here. A deep dive into China's history, its unique political system, the huge economic shifts and challenges, and this more assertive, complex role it's playing globally. It paints a picture of a nation in tremendous flux, led by very powerful Xi Jinping, but still wrestling with significant internal issues and maybe a foreign policy machine that isn't always perfectly aligned.
That sums it up well. There's this constant tension, isn't there?
Yeah.
China shows flexibility, engages with global systems, but ultimately it's domestic priorities that drive for national rejuvenation. That's what shapes its actions.
Yeah.
And sometimes that creates friction, sparks pushback internationally. It's a dynamic balancing act.
Definitely. So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on as China's influence inevitably keeps growing. In this deeply interconnected world, can that pursuit of the China dream, that intense focus on national rejuvenation, ultimately align smoothly with global expectations for stability and a rules-based order? Or are those internal contradictions, those tensions we talked about, likely to spill over in unpredictable ways? Something to keep watching.